up, family? I'm excited. This is really honestly, it's probably gonna be a two-parter. It's me and my pops, who is here with me. My dad, the guy who raised me, who beat me. No, I'm
Don't
just
go
kidding.
there. Don't say the line.
You did. Yeah, okay. And so anyway, I'm excited about this because me and my pops are going to really talk about our own personal journey on how we overcame, he overcame, and we're going to just kind of tie it together. I'm not really sure what this is going to look like, but my pops is, how old are you, Dad?
71.
Ooh,
Old.
just yeah, we can see it. You don't got to tell us. And my dad, and I'm gonna just kind of give an overview of what I know his story to be, and then I'm gonna invite him to kind of tell his story. My dad struggled with pornography most of his life, to a point where it really kind of ended my mom and dad's relationship for a season. My dad moved out, lived in a car, and then all of a sudden you go to a what was it,
Father's Heart Ministry.
Father's Heart Ministry, and the guy says this one line. He says, "If you've ever read the word and read the Bible and the words don't jump off the page into your heart, you're probably not saved." And so that night you went home trying to figure it out, like what the heck does that even mean?
Yeah, I was scared. It scared me.
Scared you?
It really scared me.
And then the next day you kind of have this God encounter.
Yes.
And honestly, and how old were you when that happened? That was about a decade plus.
Yeah,
now, right?
I was probably about 57 or 60, something in that realm. I don't know exactly.
So roughly about 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And honestly, just being on this side of it, watching it, like I've seen a different man. You're a different dad. You're different with the kids around. And your life massively shifted. You and Mom's relationship fully restored.
Yes.
Not saying it's perfect, y'all, but y'all are together, love the Lord, love each other. And so
it's a journey.
It is a journey. So, Pop, what would you like? When did it start for you? Like pornography. I mean, you obviously didn't have the internet or phones or TVs or anything humanity has today.
The ark was built for me. Okay,
Yeah, the ark.
That's all right.
I know you
That's
hung
all right.
out with Ezekiel, and
I was probably around 13, 14 when I first saw the first book. It wasn't a magazine; it was a book. Was introduced to me, and it kind of freaked me out. I didn't really know what to think about the book, but I didn't. It really didn't change a lot to me because that was the only thing I ever saw.
yeah,
It really didn't get into my system probably until I was about 15 or 16 when I started seeing magazines.
okay,
And then I wanted to see more and more and more. But it was, like I said, it was a secret thing. Mom couldn't know, Dad couldn't know, because I know my dad would just beat the tar out of me if he ever found out.
yeah.
So thing was that thing that developed in me was I was a scared kid. I mean, I was a big kid. I was always a big kid,
You are a large man.
but I was always scared, and had a very low self-esteem. So I was afraid that if anybody found out, that I would just totally be ostracized.
Yeah,
And so I just kept it to myself. But it really didn't manifest hard until I was probably in my early 20s.
and that's when you joined the military.
That's when I
right?
joined the military.
And so, how old were you when you joined the military?
I was 23.
So you were a little late for
Yes.
your time, right?
Yes.
And so, just kind of remembering some of the story, I remember one instance. I don't know if you shared it or Mom shared it, but Mom found a magazine in your car,
Yeah.
And-
Playboy magazine, yeah.
and she brought it to the pastor.
Yeah,
of the
we
church
had
y'all were
we
attending.
went. She found it, and wanted to have counseling, so we went in and met the pastor, and she presented the magazine to the pastor, and he looked at the magazine, looked at me, then he looked at my wife, and said, "Well, what's the big deal?"
Wow.
And that totally, I know my mom just got total. Your mom got totally angry, but it just kind of blew my mind because I was ready for her to be laid out.
Yeah.
I really was.
expected
And for
it.
him to say that, I mean, I'm going like, well, then what exactly is going on here? Because I thought that
You
then
thought it was
maybe
bad.
yeah, I thought it was bad, but nobody was telling me it was. And
So you knew. So you're saying in like your knower, you knew that it was wrong
Yes.
for you to look at this,
Yes.
and then it's presented. So when he was like, "What's the big deal?" for you, did it give permission? Like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Did it give, like, oh, I can, like, what? How did you process hearing somebody that you saw probably as a spiritual
Right,
authority,
right.
spiritual voice, and for him, honestly, he probably was looking at it himself. Honestly, if anybody's giving that type of advice,
Well, in all honesty, I look more at your mom. And I already saw her sight in her eyes, and I knew something had to give on this. So, but
y'all probably didn't go back to that church, did y'all?
yeah, we didn't go back to that church. We changed churches, but it didn't.
It's a good move, by the way.
It didn't really change anything in me because there was something wrong broken in me, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't really know. Everybody thought it was just pornography, and I knew there was something else wrong because no matter how many times that somebody would catch me and I would go through things, I would fall back into it because there was something broken,
Yeah,
and I didn't know what it was.
yeah. So, talk about that. Like, so figuring out what is broken. I think it's one of the biggest things to be able to diagnose what is broken. It's like when you have a bad car, right?
Right,
And you bring it
right.
to a mechanic. I am not a mechanic. I can change the oil. I can change the tire. Thank you, Pop, for teaching me that. That's about all I can do. But when the car isn't working and I got to bring it to the mechanic, I'm trying to make the sounds to the mechanic of what's wrong with the car.
Right,
And when the guy drives the car, he brings it back to me and he's like, I don't see anything wrong with it.
right.
And so finally, like, I go back and I'm trying to make the sound, and at one point they're kind of laughing at me because I'm mocking this sound that does not work. But when they drive the car and it malfunctions with the car being broken, like, I'm praising the Lord because now there's an ability to diagnose the problem that is there, which then therefore you can begin to work on the things to
Well,
bring
I
about
mean,
a wholeness.
I think that's what frustrated me the most is everybody saw this. When I point at my hand, I'm pointing at the pornography.
Yeah.
They didn't see me, and they didn't see the pain and the hurt that was inside of me.
They saw the leaves of the tree.
Yeah,
They didn't know.
that's
They
right.
couldn't look at
So
the roots,
and all they thought was to get rid of this.
and would solve the
And
problem.
when it goes down, maybe for a moment, maybe for a week, maybe
Yeah.
for a month, but the pain inside was still there. The hurt inside, brokenness was still there. So eventually I was going to drift back because that was my, I mean, I know you always hear the line about dog returning to a vomit. I hate that line because I said, like, why would I ever want to do that? But you drift to what's comfortable, to
Yeah.
what's safe to you. And pornography for me was one of those things.
It made you feel
Unfortunately,
safe.
it made me feel safe.
Okay, so I remember as a kid, I mean, it. I know that it locked you up. I remember one instant. I think this is a funny story. This is when computers. I know that happened in your lifetime, and so Google must have just came out. Like, I'm just kidding. And you searched the word. I know it was you because me and Josh didn't know what Josh is my brother. Had no idea what the word was. It was busty, which I still don't understand why that refers to a chest of a woman, but that's what
It's
it refers
because
to.
this is
You
their
don't need to
bus
explain
line.
it. Please don't explain it. And so I remember Mom finding it, and she was so livid. And so this thing gripped you so much. In hindsight, it's funny looking back at it as an adult. And the time I was extremely frustrated because I'm being accused of something for something that I didn't do, and I know my brother didn't do it because we literally did not know what that word was. It wasn't in our
Understand.
vocabulary. So for that, and you were there, how do you process the amount of, like, because that's a level of shame
Yes.
to keep you so locked in, to
Yes.
see your own kids getting blamed for something. Like,
Yes. To me, when you're talking with that, it's same thing as like when you think about alcoholics or anything else, or people on drugs.
Yeah.
They'll put the blame on anybody else. They'll rob their parents. They'll do whatever they can to get their
Yeah.
fix or whatever they're dealing with still there. And so, because I already knew your mom hated what was
Yeah.
anything to do with it. So for her to associate it with me would have been another scooping the dirt, digging my hole deeper.
Yeah.
So I know I mean, I know it was wrong. And to this day, that was one of the big shames of my life, was putting you kids in the middle of it.
Yeah. I mean, and we'll get into a little bit how, like, later it affected the way that when I fell into it and stuff. But Dad, I remember as a kid you going to these, I think there was Salt, Living
Yes.
Waters, things
Yes.
like this, these programs. Talk a little bit about what it was to be in these programs, because at one point you were leading these programs.
Yes. Yes.
And
I was.
so, but we'll get to it. But talk about what it was like to be in the program, for your own heart, and what did it do? What did it not do? Did it bring freedom? Did it not bring freedom? For you, this isn't true of everyone. This is your journey. So yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing that it did for me, it opened my eyes to the level and depth this could go to. I mean, when I was in the group and I found people who were child molesters, who were wife beaters, somebody was coming from jail, just allowed to come here, try to get some work done. I never really thought of it that deep.
Yeah.
And God dealt with me when I thought that my sin was just a little pity sin compared to theirs. And he told me, I realized that my sin is just as bad as theirs. And that hit me really hard, but yet it was still this. It still wasn't something that somebody needed to heal the hurt inside me. But that never was brought up. In all the SALT programs and the Falling Forward, all the stuff was dealing with the actual addiction.
So the external
addiction. Nothing really addressed the pain that's inside the person.
Yeah.
And I got to where I knew the lines they wanted to hear. So I could fake my way through these courses because I knew what they wanted to hear. I mean, I've been in church. I knew all the things that you needed to say to make people happy.
Yeah.
And I'm being blunt. I know sometimes it's not a pretty thing, but when you are addicted, you do what you have to do to survive with the addiction still intact. And that's what I did a few times. I mean, I went through Restoring the Foundations. The first time I went through it, it was phenomenal. I felt like there was, this
Which
is where
is
I
inner
know
healing.
the healing.
Yeah,
and
inner
I had
healing, yeah.
one that was generational curses. And when they were trying to take the one that had to do with sexual sin, I felt like there was claws in my back and it was being dragged out of me. And I mean, I was crying my eyes out. It was hurt so bad, but it didn't really go away when they got done. I mean, I thought it was, but it really didn't. It just like it subsided. So I knew it was real. I knew there was something wrong inside, but I didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. So on this journey, obviously this put a massive strain on Mom and your marriage.
Yes.
And so ultimately, I mean, this obviously was a consistent pattern for
A long time.
almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And I was out of the house. Josh was out of the house. I think Jamie was out of the house at the time too, right? Or she was right
Jamie
there.
was not out of the house yet.
So you decided to you were done, and you got into, if y'all remember those conversion vans back in the day with the TV in it. We drove. Y'all had that thing forever. Y'all put like 400,000 miles on that sucker, and you started sleeping in the back.
Yeah.
You were like,
Well, I had decided that I couldn't stay at the house anymore because I didn't want to hurt my wife anymore.
you couldn't face.
I mean,
it
I
either,
couldn't get it. I said, been through all these things. I've battled all these things, and it just can't quite get it right. And so I said, I don't want to hurt my wife anymore. So that's why I moved out. And I slept in the van. Then I rented a room, and we were separated for probably about a year, close to a year, not quite, but close to a year.
Wow. So in the midst of the separation in that year, were you still did it bring you a new freedom to look at it since you were no longer there? Like
No,
what? Like
no.
How was that?
I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't look at it at all the whole year, but it brought a coldness to my mind that you want to lose everything. You want everything just to disappear and all your kids gone. I mean, so but the thing was, I was battling with my flesh, and your flesh is going to lose. It is going to lose. You can't win a battle with an addiction, whether it's pornography or something else, on your own.
Yeah.
With your flesh, it just, you can do it for a while.
Yeah.
But your flesh is weak.
Yeah.
So, and when your mom invited me back into the house, it freaked me out because I said, "Why? I mean, I'm not any better than I was. Why are you inviting me back?"
And at this point, yeah, we're married for 25-ish.
No, it was past the 25-year mark. It was probably right around 28, 29, almost 30.
So 30 years, she invites you back in.
Yep.
So she invites you back in. You end up going, so we talked about in the beginning, kind of an overview. You end up going to this conference, and James Jordan, Father's Heart.
Father's Heart Ministry, yes.
Why in the world? I remember hearing about you going. Like, what in the heck are you doing? Why are you going to this?
Well, he came to speak at our church.
Yeah.
And what he spoke about spoke volumes to me because I knew one of my major pains and major hurts was my father. Not that he was a bad father. He wasn't a bad father. He was just gone.
Yeah.
He never was home. He was working all the time. And I never had a relationship with my father. And to bring it full tilt was like my older brother, who was 5 years older than me. He was the son. He was the grandson. And I was always in his shadow.
Yeah.
And no matter what I tried to prove, I mean, we had a fight when I moved out of the house one time. So I screamed at him that I'm not my brother. I can't do this.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there was
So
a
your
lot.
whole
There
life
was a
you
lot
felt
of pain
prepared.
that just built
Yeah.
this wall up inside me, and there was for me to fight back. But when I went to it, I didn't know what to expect, except I knew I needed something to tell me how to deal with the pain from my dad. And I remember the day that when we were there and the guy was speaking, James Jordan was speaking, and he was going through the verses, and he told, and you've mentioned this before when we've talked before. He said that if you're reading this and the words aren't jumping off and meaning something to you, you're probably not saved.
Reading this being the Bible.
The Bible.
When
When
you
you're
read the
reading the
Bible,
verses
yep.
and it's just words to you and it's not meaning anything to you, you're probably not saved. And I just totally cringed.
And so I think I've heard you say this, and because it's so impacted me in my life, and hearing you say this, is he was saying it's not like every time you read the Bible it jumps off. If you've ever read the Bible and the words have
Right.
never jumped off.
Right.
So let's pause in this moment before we keep going into this story. Dad, you had a moment. How old were you when you said you started to follow Jesus? You raised your hand.
23.
23.
It was a weekend before I went into the military.
So weekend before you were at a youth group thing with your friends?
I always said God had a sense of humor. He sent me to the military right after I got saved.
Hallelujah. Bless the Lord, oh my soul.
And there was nothing to help me flourish, to grow,
into
to whatever.
Spiritual
Speaking-
formation,
right.
discipleship.
It was
Okay.
just
So you were 22,
23.
23 years old. And now you're fast forwarding all the way to this, and you were roughly around 56 when you
Yeah.
go into this.
Yeah.
Talk about what was your journey with the Lord like in those 23, almost 25 years.
Distant. He was distant. I mean, I don't want to say I really had a close relationship with God. I didn't. I viewed God as I viewed my dad. Gone. He's out there somewhere. And the only time he's going to show up is when I need to be punished or I didn't do something right. Or so I always felt like I had to earn his love.
Yeah.
Everything was motivated by good deeds, go by the thing.
Yeah.
That's
Good
why that's part of the reason why I became a servant's heart, is because I felt like I needed to do things to make my wife happy. I had to do things to make people in the church like me, to see me as this good guy, because I would do acts of service. But I never knew him inside. I had most of my relationship with God was here. Even when I read the Bible, whenever I read the Bible, it never really sunk down into here.
The 18-inch journey.
That 8-inch journey is one of the longest journeys in the world.
So for 25 years, you are, in a sense, working to prove your relationship, prove that you're good enough, prove those things. Just even probably rooted a little bit of comparison with your brother,
Yes.
and so how did you process? I know mom is this. Yeah, I know y'all don't know my mom. I'm gonna bring her on here one of these times. She's a crazy intercessing, shundayan. She gonna call down heaven, lady. And obviously comparison is a big part of your own heart, like with
Yes.
your brother. Like you look at mom's relationship with the Lord, and you
Yeah.
look at your relationship with the Lord, which you kind of said is felt distance. How did you even go on this journey? Like, how was church? I know mom was not going to let you not go to church. So like, we were in church, rain, shine, snow, Christmas. Doesn't matter
Yes.
what day
Yes.
we was in church. If the doors were open, we were there. So how did you how was all of this like being you know?
Well, I mean, I know that this is used for a lot of men. It was true for me. Compartmentalization.
Mm,
I could be one type of person one way, and then when I'm not there, I can be a different type of person.
yeah.
And that's how I lived my life. I mean, I did what had to be done to please my wife, to be the good Christian, to do the things we need to do, get you kids to church, and do the setups, do the different things to help out the church. And I enjoyed that, but it wasn't real.
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't want to say it wasn't real. That's not the right word. It wasn't.
It was a facade. You
It
were
was a
just
facade. It
you were
really was. I
showing up
mean,
what you needed
I
to.
enjoyed doing it. That was really a fun thing for me. But I never felt my emotions were shut,
Yeah.
and I had a hard time breaking that free. That's another story. About
Yeah.
that,
So
my emotions.
let's 25 years of just kind of going through the motions
Yes.
on a Sunday morning, going through being there, showing up, taking us. I mean, Josh was the token worship leader for the church. He was the golden. I was not the golden kid.
No.
Um, and you know, Jamie, we'd be at church all the time. Then fast forward to this, Josh is a pastor. I'm pastoring at this season of
Yep.
life, and I'm 56 years old. Um, and you're in this moment. You hear this, you cringe as you hear like the boards have never jumped off the page.
Right.
You felt distance. So going home that night, if I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, is when you're telling the story, you waited to talk to him after.
Yes.
And what was that? So what did you ask him when you were there?
I said,
Hey, you said this.
Did I hear this right?
Yeah.
Do you really mean that if I'm reading the Bible and the times I'm reading it, if it doesn't mean anything more than words of the Bible, that I'm probably not saved? And he said, yeah. I mean, and I just kind of turned and walked away. I just my head probably was down to my knees, even though I was walking out.
So for 25 years, the assurance of salvation, I raised my hand, I said yes to
Yes.
Jesus. You hear that, oh, I'm probably not saved.
Yeah.
So you go home that night, like what's running through your mind?
I was totally just a mess. I was crying. I mean, I was crying. I was going, well, what am I supposed to do? I've done all these things. I did all. I mean, it totally tore down the acts of service thing inside me. I said, I did all this stuff. I'm doing all this stuff, but yet now, he's saying that I'm not going to see God when I die, and that just totally rocked my world.
Yeah.
And when I went the next day, I was not really in the mood to wanting to go the next day. I really wasn't. I didn't even want to go back
But why did you go back?
because I had to.
Why did you have to? You paid for it?
That's number one. And
I'm
number
gonna get
two,
my money back.
and number two, your mom said you're going.
Okay.
She saw me that night I was just
Low key tormented, like
I
with
was,
all of
I was hurting. And when we went the next day, we did the thing about writing a letter to your dad and telling him how you really feel. And that was the hardest letter I ever wrote. I mean, I let all the pain that was inside come out. I let all the frustration that was inside come out. And when I finished writing it, he said, "Now we're going to take these letters and burn them." And God doesn't care about that. He loves you. He doesn't care that there was pains and hurts. Yeah, your dad. He's not your dad. He loves you for you. And it started just burning inside and burning inside, burning inside. And then I don't know who came up to pray for me. I really don't. I still don't remember this really well, but it was just like I felt God hugging on me.
Mm.
And that was the first time that I actually felt like my heart was burning a little bit, and I started feeling something. And I'm going like, oh, this is what it's like. And so I mean, I really got after everything he said, everything he did. I mean, we wrote a letter to my mom, and that one was not as hard, but it was still hard because my mom was 5 foot nothing, but she ruled the roost.
Mm.
She had a tongue on her, and we knew who was boss. So I I had to deal with that and wrote that and burnt that. And it was just like every time I did one of these letters, something was being broken off me.
Yeah.
And when I walked out of that day after writing the letter for my mom, I just felt, okay, God, where do we go from here?
I remember that day, and
'Cause I called you.
you did call me. You called me crying, which was very weird because you're not a crier.
No.
And in fact, I can maybe recall one time in my entire life seeing you cry. Like before that, you just never cried. And you called me, you're crying, and you're asking me to forgive you. You're like, I've been a bad dad, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, I encountered Jesus. I'm like, what? Where are you? What is going on? And I remember just from that moment, like even in the midst of it, because like even backtracking for me is, I remember when I started to struggle with pornography. I was, before I got saved and started, I just started looking at it. We had phones, we didn't have magazines and stuff. It was a lot more accessible to my generation. And so, but I remember when I got saved, I stopped cold turkey, never looked at it. And then 3 months later, I found myself back in the struggle of it. And there was only one person in the world I did not want to tell, which was you. And the reason why I didn't want to tell you was, one, I was ashamed of it because I've seen what it did to you and to mom and to the family dynamics of our house. But I also didn't want you to feel like you were responsible for my stuff. Because I was like, you didn't do this to me. I did this to me. This was my choosing.
Which I would have done.
And so I remember I had accountability partners. I was in church. I was praying. I was reading the word. And this went on for about 3 months. And the point where I had to call you the first time is I was working at a job and I made the computer crash. And I had to call you. And I would go in the back. I would stand up on the table when nobody was around, and I'd be interceding, like, shut up, baba, never again, and then like, again, I was in it. And I remember though, when I had to call you, something broke in me, and it was the power of shame. I had no problem telling anybody. Like every guy was like, yeah, man, you're going to make it through. Woo. Like every guy would be in those boats. They just were like, yeah, man, come on. I'm glad you're telling us you're forgiven, which we knew. But for me, what I learned through this with you and my journey with you, like in this realm, if you will, of stuff, is when I'm willing to confess who I'm most scared to confess to.
Yeah.
Because the power of confession, it unlocks the shame that was there when I told you. Like once I told you, I'm not scared to tell anybody anymore. Like, and we didn't do, like, I remember you brought over the salt stuff and we're like, we're going to go through this, and none of that stuff did anything for me. It was me telling you broke the power of that in my life. It broke the reality of shame in my life, and it did something inside of me where it actually brought healing for me, for you. Like, because I was pissed off at you. I was angry with you for like not being able to. I'm like, dude, come on, stop doing this. Like, because I remember being young, what old guys would tell young guys is just get married. You struggle with porn, just get married, and that solves nothing.
No,
You
it
know,
does not.
and like, and but yet this was the prescription given
Yeah.
for probably a really long time. And I mean, Paul says if you're burning, get married, right? So like, we're like, oh, it's biblical, right? And there's some validity to that, but this does not solve the
Right.
problem. In fact, in premarital, when I find out a guy's struggling with this, which I go to, I'm like, until we solve this problem, you don't need to get married because it's that much baggage. And the reason why is because of your journey and your
Absolutely.
story. And so you go into moments, you know, and I mean, you were 56, you're 71 now. I have so many jokes that just run through my head with you. I was about to ask you about Ezekiel and how when he raised the dead, how was that like? But going back to, you know, these years of freedom. So what was it like beginning to rebuild the trust with mom?